what has happened to him cannot be evidence of God's judgment against some sort of sin in his life. But whatever is happening to him is happening because God has purposed this against him. God has done this despite the fact that he is innocent. Now, third and final significant theme here is a conclusion that Job comes to in this first cycle of dialogue. You see, a conclusion that Job comes to as he's sort of evaluating what's going on here is that in this fallen world, even a blameless man, such as Job himself, needs an arbiter between him and God. Even the blameless, in other words, even the blameless need a mediator. And I know we have some kids in the even the blameless man needs an arbiter. We have 3 subpoints that arise from the text, and you'll have to forgive me because they're kind of long, but I just couldn't think of how to shorten them up at all. But if you're taking notes, I'll go slow. All right, first subpoint that arises from the text is half-truths from bad friends. So that's what his friends are good at doing. They're good at using half-truths in their arguments. Okay, so we have half-truths from bad friends. Number 2, Job's insistence that God has done this. So this is something that God has done. And then finally, the need for an arbiter. Okay, half-truths from bad friends, God has done this, and the need for an arbiter. All right, we'll get into our first point then, and looking at this, again, we're summarizing the main arguments between Job and his friends, and to do this, I'm going to read from chapter 4, verses 7 through 9, and then I'm going to jump to chapter 8, verses 20 through 22. So, chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. Here, one of Job's friends is speaking, his friend Eliphaz, and he says, Remember who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen those who plow iniquity, and sow trouble reap the same. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. All right, so here Job's friend is saying, no one innocent ever perished like you're perishing, Job. It's chapter 8, verse 20. We have more of the same from another one of Job's friends. Behold, God will not reject a blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouting. Those who hate you will be clothed with shame, and the tent of the wicked will be no more. Okay, again, we're summarizing the argument of Job's friends, and as we can see, that what they're insisting upon is that a blameless man most certainly would not be suffering like Job is suffering. All right, for Job's friends, suffering and loss like this is an indication that God has rejected you. All right, God has rejected you. That's why you must be suffering like this, Job. Right? Chapter 8, verse 20. One of his friends says, Behold, God will not reject a blameless man. What his friends are implying is that God must have rejected you because you have some kind of sin in your life, Job. Now, this, of course, is an incredibly naive way to look at life. And it's amazing to me that these guys are supposed to be wise men, but they have such a foolish way of looking at the world. They have a foolish understanding of who God is. And like we talked about a couple weeks ago, part of the reason for this is because they share something of Satan's perspective when it comes to God's relationship with his people. So, flip back over to Job chapter 1 with me. Job chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." So Satan right here thinks that God's relationship with his people is transactional. It's just like a formula. Right? Job only follows you. He's only faithful to you because you've given him good things in life. You take away those things, he'll curse you to your face. Right? It's just a simple transaction. We love God because he gives us good things. God gives us good things because we obey. This is really what Job's friends are insinuating. That Job has been disobedient. He has some kind of hidden sin. Therefore, God is pouring out his judgment on him. Right? Job's not holding up his end of the transaction, which is why this terrible thing is happening to him. Now again, terrible and foolish way to look at a relationship with God. But remember, one of the things that Job does for us, or what he does in this account, is Job acts as a representative for God. Remember, God selects Job specifically to humiliate Satan. God says to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" All right, so God selects Job as his representative to humiliate Satan. And in this book, part of what he represents is the godly perspective on suffering. Job's friends, of course, represent the opposite perspective. For Job's friends, the reason bad things befall people is because they have transgressed in some way against God. Right, so really only bad things happen to bad people, people who fail to be obedient. Now, that is true sometimes, right? We certainly want to acknowledge that. Right? Sometimes God disciplines us by giving us the very consequences for the actions that we carried out that we deserve. So that is true sometimes. But the problem here is where Job's friends think the authority over life lies. For Job's friends, this is a problem of authority. According to Job's friends, who has been given ultimate control over the circumstances of one's life? Well, they acknowledge that God has control over these circumstances. But here's the thing, they also want to elevate man into a position where he shares some of that control. They recognize God's authority, but they foolishly believe that man is in control of his life in a way that parallels God's authority. They foolishly believe that man is able to exercise this kind of level of control. They elevate the position of man to be in control. For Job's friends, control over the outcomes of life is something that is shared by God and man. Well, what does Job's life show us? What does Job's life tell us? What does his testimony tell us? Who's in control? Where does the ultimate authority lie? It is only with God. Clearly, in Job's account, God is in control over all things. Right? He's in authority over the angels and the fallen angels. He's in authority over Job and his family and all the things that happen to them. He is clearly in authority over all of this. So, Job's testimony, who's in control? It's only the Lord. For Job, the problem of why bad things happen is not explained away by people's behavior. Now, the behavior of people, the actions of people certainly have a part to play, but we cannot elevate the actions and will of man to the same level as that of God. Now, also like Satan, these three friends, try to use truth to validate their argument. Hey, look with me at chapter 5, verse 12. Chapter 5, verses 12 through 18. So here, one of Job's friends is speaking, and he says that God frustrates the devices of the crafty so that their hands achieve no success. He catches the wise in their own craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are brought to a quick end. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope at noonday as in the night. But he saves the needy from the mouth, from the sword of their mouth, and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor have hope, and injustice shuts her mouth. Behold, blessed is the one whom God reproves. Therefore despise not the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he binds up. He shatters, but his hands heal. Now, that last verse, verse 18, should look a bit familiar. This should remind us, as part of their argument, to say why bad people. Okay, and in doing so, they deny the free, absolute, providential will of God in this case of Job's life. Are we all able to see that? Are we seeing how that's happening? Job's friends are using something that is true to deny something else that is true. Right? They're having a problem with two things being true at the same time. They're trying to explain away one over the other. And again, this is a foolish way to look at the world. But to be honest, sometimes we are tempted to think this way. Right? And here's where I believe we are tempted. We're tempted to think this way, not when something bad happens, but we are tempted to think this way when something good happens. When something good happens, we are tempted to think that we had more of a part to play in that than we actually did. Okay, we want to take some sort of credit for that positive outcome. Now, people even do this when it comes to salvation. We want to credit ourselves in some way, even if it's a small way, and we want to say that we had some kind of part to play in that. Now, does God share his authority with us like that? Does he share his rule with us like that? He does not. There is only one who is sovereign. There is only one who gives life and breath and all that there is. There is only one we have to thank for all the good things that we have been given. There's only one whose providential rule extends over all things, and he is our triune God. We have no right to elevate our will or our actions up to the point where they're on the same playing field as God's will. Right, where they're in some kind of competition with God's will. We are the creatures. He is the creator. His will transcends our will. Now, this is something that people have struggled with. Christians have struggled with this throughout history. Even great Christian figures have struggled with this, holding these two truths at the same time. I think about Charles Wesley. Charles Wesley is one of the greatest hymn writers of all time. Right? Could be the greatest hymn writer of all time. Thousands and thousands of hymns this man has wrote. Great hymns. Some of them are in the Trinity hymnal. Right? And Can It Be That I Should Gain? That is one of the greatest hymns, in my opinion. But when it comes to Charles Wesley and his brother John as teachers, they try to explain something that only belongs to the counsel of God's will. You see, according to the Scriptures, two things are true. One, that man is entirely responsible for his actions. He will be judged for his actions. What is also true is that God is utterly and entirely sovereign over all things. He's told us the beginning, or he's told us the end from the very beginning. And that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense to us. We can't explain that. But that does not change the fact that it's true. God is in control over all things, even the free actions of men. And that sounds like an oxymoron. It sounds like something we can't explain. Like we can't explain how those two things go together. But that does not change the fact that both of those things are true. God is utterly and entirely sovereign, and man is responsible for his actions, for he will be judged for them. Rather than just leaving it at that, the Wesleys, when trying to explain salvation, they taught something called prevenient grace. So this is something that's different from saving grace. Prevenient grace is the belief that God gives everyone a small measure of grace. Two things can be true at the same time. Man is responsible for